history. Orrin and I both just love history. I don't know why. We've just always read history and talked about history and been inspired by history and looked to our past for stories about how we're supposed to charge into our future. And one of the stories of a leader that intrigued us is Queen Elizabeth I from England in the 16th century. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with Queen Elizabeth, but she comes from one of the most original, dysfunctional families you could ever imagine. Her father starts a feud with the Pope, and if your father's feuding with the Pope, that's probably not a real good idea. But the reason he's feuding with the Pope is because he wants to divorce his wife. And he eventually gets rid of the Pope in his life, creates his own religion, and cuts his wife's head off. He marries the next gal that he wanted, and along the line he has kids with some of these ladies, and several of them lose their heads along the way, and there's quite a long line of these wives. Imagine the ad in the paper for one of Henry VIII's wives. Must have iron collar, whatever. But Elizabeth is interesting because her dad had her mother executed. Now, right off the bat, you've got some issues. Then, while she was still young, she was framed in a scandal. And they were trying to make her look bad, and she was held in suspicion, and so they kind of confined her to the Tower of London for a long time, and she was pretty much kept in confinement through the whole reign of her cousin, Edward VI, who was kind of a knucklehead. And then when he died young, the next person on the throne was a woman, which was very rare for a woman to actually rule a kingdom at the time, and her name was Mary I. Now, Mary is an interesting character, too. All the characters in this story are interesting. Mary was the half-sister and older half-sister of Elizabeth. And Mary quickly developed the nickname Bloody Mary. Now, when your dad executes your mom and your half-sister has the nickname of Bloody Mary, this is a very interesting Christmas card that you would be sending out. Now, Bloody Mary was one religious angle, and Elizabeth was another, and so Elizabeth was held in suspicion because of that. And meantime, Bloody Mary got her nickname because she was kind of killing a whole bunch of people who didn't agree with her idea of the religion, and it was this big thing. And then when she died, during that whole time, Elizabeth was using the time in court. Although she was in confinement, she was still taking advantage of the opportunity to learn from the best. She was still royalty, and she was still had access to great mentors and training, and so she took massive advantage of her educational opportunities, and she almost just bided her time, sly like a fox. And when Mary died, Elizabeth took the throne. And to this point, you can see that Queen Elizabeth was a leader. She had something special just surviving this family. Just to make it into her 20s was quite the accomplishment in that family in those times. And she ascends the throne of England as Queen Elizabeth. Now, she had a couple big issues facing her. One big problem was that she was becoming queen at a time when queens didn't normally run countries. Well, her half-sister had kind of done that already, but she'd made a real mess of the thing. Killing off a bunch of her subjects and stuff doesn't make you real popular. And then Queen Elizabeth takes the throne, and she's the opposite religious angle from what her sister was, so she had all those enemies, and it was this big mess. And it could have very easily degenerated into a civil war for England. And so she had all these problems facing her. But she had taken advantage of her confinement to learn and get educated and be trained. And she immediately started to assert leadership. Immediately. Here's this young woman from a dysfunctional background. A dad that probably never read her stories at night before bed. Who was basically in jail most of her life, and now she's queen of a kingdom. And she begins to rule the kingdom. Not necessarily with an iron fist, although she's definitely no saint. But she started to bond with her subjects. And she started to gain popularity, and she started to actually get rapport with the masses. And she'd go among the people, and she began to surround herself with talent. And she attracted the most brilliant minds of her kingdom to her court during these years. And most of these people weren't saints either, but names like Sir Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, and John Hawkins, just from the adventurer category alone. Now, these guys were adventurers, and they were opportunists, and they were seafaring adventurous and almost pirates. And then England kind of has this undeclared war going with Spain, and Spain was by far the most powerful nation on the globe at the time. And Elizabeth is coy enough never to truly get in a war with Spain, which could have easily crushed this little island nation, but she quietly built up strength and became better and better on the seas and stronger with her navy. And finally, there had been so many things that had happened that Spain launched the Great Armada. Have you ever heard of the Spanish Armada? And the Spanish Armada, hundreds of ships launch out to attack England. And through the help of all of these seafaring adventurers and the weather, the Spanish Armada never got a chance to attack England. And there were many other things that happened, but Queen Elizabeth ruled that kingdom for over 4 decades. And she took an era of calamity and chaos, a quarrelsome country, perhaps on the edge of civil war, a little tiny island country way up in the north that had really had no global power, and she turned it into a global powerhouse. She turned it around economically, she built instability, and she left a legacy too. Not only did she create a whole way of being, but she developed something called countryhood in the nation of England. And people started to have pride in the fact that they were English. And the English reach started to go around the globe. And England was no longer just an island nation, it became a world power. And that's leadership.